Good evening, and thank you for tuning in to What Do You Think? My name is Bill Morse, and we are here every Thursday evening at 6 p.m. for roughly 20 to 30 minutes of your calls coming in. This is a live call-in program, and I welcome your calls. This program depends on your calls. And as I mentioned in closing last week, and by the way, I hope everybody had a good Easter. We certainly have been having nice Easter weather here in the Bellows Falls area with sunshine and temperatures approaching 60 degrees. It's really a pleasure just to be out and about and enjoying the sunshine and fresh air. I mentioned last week that through the communications officer in Senator Patrick Leahy's office, one of our two senators here in Vermont, that he would be willing to field questions or take questions in for the senator. This is again through his office in Washington. The gentleman's name is David Carl, and I was in touch with David last week and mentioned to him that many people are frustrated by conflicting news that they hear, and it seems to be very commonplace to the point where you don't know which news source to trust, even as to what someone in political office is doing. So even though I've looked at it a number of times, Senator Leahy does have a pretty good website. It's easy to find, and it's broken down into what he's doing, what he considers important issues facing Vermonters and the nation, also what bills he has signed, and also you can look through the bills. So it's a fairly comprehensive, if you have the time and the inclination to do a little research. So what I thought we would do is come up with questions. You and me would come up with questions that I would email to David Carl, and let me just make sure I've got his name right. I really don't trust myself to, David Carl, communications officer. So we would come up with questions for the senator. David would pass those questions along to Senator Leahy, and then we would get some answers and perhaps a further discussion. So that's what tonight's program is about. It's input from you on what questions you would like Vermont Senator Patrick Leahy to answer. Now, as a bit of an introduction, I'm not really too familiar with the background of Senator Leahy. I do know that he has been in office since I graduated from high school in '74. And I thought it would be good to kind of go back to that time period and kind of set the mood, and it would help explain there's a little deja vu here in what we're experiencing here in 2021, and also some of what propelled, I believe, Senator Leahy, who ran as a Democrat, to win a seat in the Vermont Senate, a state that traditionally was Republican up until, I'd say, 40 years ago, and then it's changed over to the Democratic Party. But let's go back to April 8th, 1974. And for those of you old enough to remember, there were three songs that were big hits at that time. Number one, April 8th, 1974, was Seasons in the Sun by Terry Jacks. Kind of a, what you would call bubblegum pop music. Kind of like, trying to think, Sugar Sugar by the Archies. Kind of feel-good, peppy type of music. The second hit in that week in 1974 was Barbra Streisand and The Way We Were. This came the soundtrack from a movie with Robert Redford. Again, this was early April 1974. And in seventh place Aretha Franklin's hit Until You Come Back to Me, which, by the way, was written by Stevie Wonder when he was 15 years of age. Stevie Wonder at 15 wrote Until You Come Back to Me, which was performed and made a big hit for Aretha Franklin this week in 1974, 47 years ago. Now, if we go from pop music to movies, that first week of April 74, Mel Brooks came out with Blazing Saddles. Blazing Saddles came out into the theaters in March and April 1974. Robert Redford was very busy in this time period. He also performed in The Great Gatsby with Mia Farrow, who you remember perhaps from as being married to Woody Allen. John Carpenter directed a science fiction movie that came out in early April 1974 called Dark Star. Dark Star, which I did not see at the time, but if I think of it, I think in the next couple of weeks I'm going to try to watch it. I believe it is available on YouTube. Dark Star, a earlier science fiction movie by John Carpenter, the director. And the fourth movie mentioned from April 1974 goes to Pam Greer. Pam Greer starred in a number of B-rated flicks. This one was Foxy Brown, and when I say B-rated, I mean they were lower budget. And they were generally a good place for people to come in as beginner actors and actresses. And Foxy Brown, starring Pam Greer, was definitely one of these. Actually, it was kind of breaking ground for many black actors in that there were very few roles for them. And unfortunately, and this is a sideline in our culture, many of the roles were related to crime and an adventure. So, Foxy Brown with Pam Greer. She also was in a number of other roles in the 70s. So, going to politics. In April of 74, you had Richard Nixon was in the White House. He had been in the White House since 68. Lyndon Johnson, who had been the Democratic president of the United States, he chose not to run. I think the Vietnam War and the war on poverty and then the unrest in our cities, the assassinations of Martin Luther King and Bobby Kennedy. A lot of things were going on, and he decided not to run again for re-election in 68. So Richard Nixon ran again. He had run against Kennedy in 1960, and through the help of Kennedy's father in Chicago, Kennedy won. Nixon lost, and Nixon ran again. He became the president. He won against Hubert Humphrey, who was the Democratic choice in 68. You also may remember the 1968 Chicago Riots during the Democratic convention. So as I said before, there's a lot of deja vu as to civil unrest and people losing faith in the political system and how it was meeting the needs of the day. And so Nixon did not, for various reasons, get us out of the war in Vietnam until after 72. Of course, he had to run again. So he ran against George McGovern, who I believe was from Minnesota. No, that may have been Humphrey. No, South Dakota, I want to say. George McGovern. And George McGovern was anti-war, of course. He also, I think anti-war was the big thing. And he came across, unfortunately, as far as the choice is concerned, as the weaker of the two candidates. When all is said and done after the election in 72, Nixon carried every state except Massachusetts. I believe Massachusetts was the only state that voted for George McGovern. So Nixon was in for another 4 years. Now, I mention this because, ironically, Richard Nixon had a paranoid side to him. And he was later connected with a break-in at an apartment complex in Washington, D.C. called the Watergate. And why was this apartment, or the offices in this apartment complex, why were they broken into? They were broken into for dirt on McGovern and his election team, which, first of all, was illegal, but secondly, totally unnecessary. And what happens was the security guards at the Watergate apartment complex noticed flashlights in the dark going through this office. Police were summoned and the burglars were caught. The burglars talked and implicated 7 key members of Richard Nixon's re-election campaign. So there was an investigation. There was talk of impeachment. Richard Nixon had compromising tapes of conversations. He recorded all its phone conversations. And his secretary, I believe her name was Wood, refused, or through his orders, refused to hand over the tapes. Well, the tapes were handed over through subpoena. And there were a number of gaps whereby the secretary had accidentally stepped on the delete button, foot pedal, in making the recordings. So, again, none of this was necessary because Nixon was such a stronger candidate with 4 years behind him, and Americans trusted him to end the war, as he said, with honor in Vietnam. Well, through Henry Kissinger, in the peace talks in Paris between the U.S. and Hanoi, there was a peace deal worked out where we basically backed out a year later in 73 and let the North take over the South, and the rest you can look up. The country, Vietnam, has been a communist country since then. Anyway, Nixon was facing impeachment over his responsibility for what his underlings had done, and so he, August of 74, he left. There's a picture of him saluting from Marine as he gets onto Marine One and leaves the White House grounds for the first time. Well, as you can imagine, there was a lot of anti-Republican sentiment in the country. People were disillusioned. They were disappointed and outraged. And so it was easier, I think, for a Democratic candidate in a traditionally Republican state or environment to win. And so Patrick Leahy, who was the prosecutor in Chittenden County, he decided to run for the Senate seat. He got the Senate seat, and he began his first term as senator for the state of Vermont, one of 2, in 1975. Now, before we go to questions for the senator, I just wanted to go over, and this is from his website, a few points. Some of these may be pluses, some of these you decide, but just some of the positions that he's had since he's been in office, since 75. He's been against the death penalty for the reason that he believes, and I can understand this, we need further DNA testing for death row inmates so that we can screen people who could not have possibly been there for a crime. So because of the lack of irrefutable truth, he's against the death penalty. He is also in favor of affirmative action in giving people with a so-called minority background a hand up in going for jobs or different positions. He is in favor of preschool for all third and four-year-olds. He has been active in antitrust efforts through the Federal Trade Commission and the Department of Justice. And I want to get back to the antitrust efforts in a minute. He has been supportive of Vermont dairy farmers and bringing them higher yields or more funding for their products, more subsidies. He's been a proponent of the Farm to School program and bringing good nourishment to school lunches. He is an abortion rights activist, and I believe that goes to late term. And he's also for judicial or prison reform in reducing nonviolent sentences and increasing the penalties for violent crime. He is in favor of closing Gitmo, or the Guantanamo Bay detention facility in southeastern Cuba. He has supported punishment or legal action to take in the stance of war profiteering, which is, that sounds like a rabbit hole. Very noble, but I'm not quite sure. I'd be interested to get an update on that. He voted against the North American Free Trade Agreement in the mid-90s. He voted for the Free Trade Agreement in the mid-90s. And he voted against the Central America Free Trade Agreement, which was, I believe, about 10 years ago. Let's see. He believes human activity is responsible for climate change, and I want to get back to that in a minute. And he was against the pipeline that has come up for discussion across the Dakotas because he believes there needs to be more environmental assessment of the pipeline location, and also more inclusion of talking with the native tribes that live in the area where the pipeline is going through. He is against school prayer, against school vouchers, and he has been a proponent of the Iran nuclear deal. Let's see. He's also been a strong supporter of Obamacare, and as with fellow Senator Bernie Sanders, he has supported Medicare for all. He supports background checks for handgun and weapons buyers, gun buyers. And he has also, and this is something you don't hear of too often, he's also been in favor of cleaning up landmine or anti-personnel mine locations around the world. As you know, probably one of the uglier sides of internal skirmishes or civil wars is the planting or the mining of areas where civilians are, children, and that many of these mines are still active. They're still not charted where they are. And so he has been a proponent of international efforts to locate through different committees and associations where the landmines are, getting them removed safely, and also offering medical help to those who have been hit by who've been maimed by stepping on landmines, and that I think is very commendable. He was in favor of more recent, the impeachment of President Trump over the Ukraine telephone call that the president had with the Ukrainian president. And he was also the chair of the committee that investigated the riot at the Capitol on January 6th. He also believed that was an impeachable offense, in that the riot was incited, in his opinion, by President Trump. So that's a little, I'm sorry if I was long-winded, but I wanted just to bring up a little background on Senator Leahy. So if you have a question for the senator that I can pass along through his communications officer, please give a call. You have the Zoom number down below on the screen. You just dial in that number, the 929 number, and then there's going to be a meeting ID number which you will call in, or which you will punch in, and then finally a passcode for the meeting. So a meeting number and a passcode, and then you're on the air with me. So we have a caller already who has been patiently waiting. Do you have a question or that you would like to pose to Senator Patrick Leahy? Go ahead.
Yes, hello?
Yes, hi, you're on.
Yeah. I'm 68 years old. I've watched a lot of administrations and a lot of politicians come and go. And what I've noticed over the last decade or two is a frustrating act of where when Congress brings forth bills on both sides, bipartisan bills, and they come to the Senate, I'm very, very tired to see the absolute polarity of how both sides of the Senate just follow lockstep to their party, and basically it results in a paralysis of possible bills being passed. And my question to him is, with his long-term experience in the Senate, does he feel that this can ever be improved so that there can be some bipartisanship, people crossing the aisles and actually trying to negotiate some of these new bills rather than just the parties locking into one decision and being, now that it's roughly 50-50 or thereabouts, basically a lot's not getting done for the country. So is there something he feels he can do to try to create that environment, because it's for so long been so polarized?
Very good question. My initial reaction would be that, as I'm sure you've recognized, these bills are often very lengthy and complicated. Lengthy and complicated in that they are hundreds, if not a few thousand pages long, and that they have a sundry of add-ons, or what's the word? Added requirements.
I know what you're saying. Basically, there are some things that are either hidden or buried in there that they don't know.
No, that's true. In fact, the COVID relief bills often do not have anything to do with COVID nor America, and they seem to be kind of like a pig pile of pet projects from different politicians or different constituencies that want to see the door open, and so that this kind of brings a rush of input that really is not helpful or addresses the immediate need. And I think that's an excellent question for the senator, but my gut reaction is the bills are too long. You should be able to say what you need to in 5 pages or less, and deal with the need. If the need needs to be broken up into a series of steps, then each bill is a step. I think that by having a bill that is too long, too diluted in its scope, you're going to run the risk of people hiding behind the bill and for partisan reasons saying, I'm in favor of it or I'm against it. Because there's a lot of wiggle room, whereby if you have a 5-page statement, that's the bill, and it addresses one need and one need only of the American people, then you stick with that, you vote with that, and then you proceed. Does that make sense to you?
Absolutely. It just doesn't seem the way that government's being done now, but you're absolutely right.
Well, I don't I'm naive. I don't know how things work, but it almost sounds like we need to start from scratch and clear the deck. And as you said, find a way of taking care of through smaller steps, concise smaller steps, these needs that have been going unaddressed. Um, Very good. Do you have any other point that you would like to share with us right now?
Well, there was, and you started to touch upon it. One of the things that really amazes me now, I can recall back in the late 60s and early 70s, monopolies, or things that were considered as being monopolies, were being broken up. And you may recall the breakup of AT&T. We have now the 4 top companies in this country doing 20% of our commerce. How can that be? How can Amazon grow to the size that it is? And it's basically unbridled. Every time I turn around, I'm looking at more Amazon Prime trucks on the road and so forth. I mean, they're starting to phase out using the post office and using UPS for deliveries. I mean, they just become more vertically integrated. And it's just becoming a mega company. And why is it allowed to exist in that scale?
Excellent question. Excellent.
And being that he's involved in that in the past, it's just amazing that it just proliferates and nobody seems to care, because it's a going business entity. But it is out of control.
Well, it's out of control, and because in 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court said it was okay for corporations to sponsor candidates legally, Amazon or any other large conglomerate can finance a candidate for Senate, for Congress, and they can do it legally. So who is electing our representatives, a corporation or us? I'm afraid it's a corporation.
You're right. Back in the 60s, lobbyists didn't exist, and now you look at them, and they're a big part of government.
Yes, they are government. It's something that we need to get a handle on, because technology is going to take government further and further away from us, and technology, I believe, is going to make it make it much easier to manipulate people through the media, which also needs to be broken up, through big tech, which also needs to be broken up, and as you said, through these retail giants like Amazon, that are not only retail giants, but they also are in information sharing. We've got Big Brother, and I think not enough people are aware of the implications of having Big Brother tapped into your personal life and controlling your needs as far as being a consumer, and more importantly, being a citizen of hopefully what will remain a democratic country. But I think that's seriously under threat, and so I am going to formulate your thoughts into a question as far as big tech, retail giants like Amazon, the media giants, and how we can. I think there have been hearings, Facebook, for example, and Jeff Bezos, Amazon has resigned, so there has been some shaking up. But I don't want window dressing. I want to see actual change in structure so that these entities are answerable in a democracy. And that's that. So I think what we're going to do, Kurt, is we're going to go with those two for right now. I'm going to submit them tomorrow morning to David, and kind of get a roll going here, some momentum. Next week, I will not go through the background again, which ate up a lot of time, and I apologize if that was boring. And we will continue looking at possible questions that you have. That's you sitting on the couch or wherever you happen to be. Questions you have for the senator in these times where the news is confusing, contradictory, and manufactured. very often. So please come back Thursday next week. It's going to be the 15th of April. And we will continue with questions for the senator. Hopefully I'll have some answers to those first 2 points for next Thursday in the meantime. So, Kurt, I want to thank you for the call, and I want to thank everyone for tuning in, and please get off the fence. We have a lot of work to do in this country if it's going to remain our country, and part of that is being informed and having a connection with our representatives like Senator Patrick Leahy. So again, I wish everyone a good night. Enjoy the nice weather, and please tune in with your questions for Senator Leahy next Thursday at 6. Good night, everyone. Good night, Kurt.